Chapter 59. As his energy, Xi was filled by the physical energy, and as the physical energy started to permeate his body, a fresh presence spread from his body. It was like an orchid that was slowly blooming at this moment. Li Daoji was standing in front of the leek field outside the grass hut. While he did not know the changes in Ding Ning's body, he knew Ding Ning's previous cultivation best. He knew that Ding Ning's cultivation had been extremely stable before this. This stability made him feel anticipation. As he looked at the clouds in the sky, he suddenly sensed the fresh presence coming from the grass hut. He immediately understood what Ding Ning had done. A rare, excited smile appeared on his face. His feet tapped lightly on the ground, and he jumped forward. His figure passed through the white clouds and landed on the mountain path of White Goat Cave. Usually he would fly like this, but this time he jumped hard and landed astoundingly high. With a bang, the sound of his landing echoed in the mountain valley. Many people noticed Li Daoji's abnormality. Zhang Yi had been descending the mountain and preparing to cultivate at the bottom of White Goat Cave, but when he saw Li Daoji's strange expression, he thought of a possibility, and his body inexplicably froze. Sect Uncle Li Daoji. He bowed with folded hands. Before he could say more, Li Daoji nodded at him from the mountain path, not far above, and said he had a breakthrough. This is... Zhang Yi's stiff body shook violently, although he was somewhat prepared. When he heard this, he was so surprised that he almost fell down the mountain path. This is astounding. Many breaths later, he finally recovered his wits with a trembling voice and was able to say such a complete sentence. Ding Ning really had a breakthrough. Ding Ning really broke through from Realm 1 to Realm 2. Ding Ning really reached energy refinement in a month. Almost all the White Goat Cave students had walked onto the mountain path outside. Everyone's mouths were open as though they were looking at a sudden storm. They looked up at the sky. Really? At this moment, even Shui Wangshu, who was meditating in the tallest Taoist temple, felt this strange sound. He opened his eyes and instantly understood what had happened. Ouch! A soft cry of pain was heard. He accidentally tore off several strands of his beard. The sun was already setting in the west, and the sunset glow was getting thicker. The Green Vine Sword Academy was already preparing a banquet to welcome the students. The students from the 20 or so cultivation grounds who had come to watch the ceremony had all arrived. They gathered in an empty space in front of a stone hall in the Green Vine Sword Academy. In addition, the students from the Green Vine Sword Academy had also joined in, so the scene became even more lively. Nangong Kaishu was sitting beside Su Hashan and Xie Changsheng. Xie Changsheng's fearful sister, Xie Ro, was sitting close to Xie Changsheng. Xie Changsheng had a bitter expression on his face. From time to time, he would receive a few words of reprimand. Up until now, White Goat Cave has not moved at all. A month has passed. Now, someone is betting with you. Do you still want to bet? I don't know what you are thinking. Even if you have not seen the hardships of people earning money, you should think more for the family. Why did you jump out to argue with Ku Shichuan? Ku Shichuan may enter Min Mountain Sword Sect to study. Even if he loses in the Min Mountain Sword trials with his present cultivation, he will have good achievements in the future. The family's business is about peace and prosperity. You are the one who causes trouble the most. If you do not restrain yourself, you will make enemies for the family everywhere. The family gives you money for you to use on cultivation or travel and make friends. Is it for you to use to bet on this wine shop, youth? Xie Changsheng was used to Xie Ro's temper and discipline. Adding on that his daily expenses were in her hands, he could only say inside that he could not hear. But Nangong Tsaishu's eyebrows rose when she heard Xie Ro mention the wine shop youth. I heard that you said in front of the Green Vine Sword Academy that if Ding Ning had a breakthrough in a month, you would have him become Xie Changxing's brother-in-law. She could not help but look at Xie Ro, who had a stern expression, and interrupted. Does Xie Changxing have any other sisters? He only has me as his sister. Xie Ro heard Nangong Saishu's words. She smiled and said, Sister Kaishu, not to mention that he only has me as his sister. Even if he does, can I make the decision for someone else in such a major matter? Nangong Kaishu thought of Ding Ning's health and the pill medicine her father had not given to Huyin. She grew even more impatient. She said with a stern expression, Then you are serious? If Ding Ning really reaches energy refinement in a month, you will marry no one else but him? Suhashan was shocked. He thought inside, was it really autumn and dry that even people were easily impatient? Why was Nangong Saishu's words so cold and sharp today? Looking at Nangong Saishu's cold expression, Xie Ro stilled slightly but then smiled unconcernedly. Who does not know that the Xie family always keeps our promises? I am not a man, but I will not go back on my words. Just now, Nangong Kaishu had not spoken in a low voice, so Suhashan felt that Nangong Kaishu was strange today. Xie Ro's response was powerful, and everyone around heard it. Not far away, Ku Shichuan had been drinking by himself. Seeing this scene, he couldn't help but shake his head in ridicule. He thought it had been so long since they had entered the sect, and they were still talking about that person. So boring. However, it was also at this moment that several heavy footsteps sounded. Someone rushed over and could not control the physical energy under their feet. They stirred up large amounts of dust. Nangong Kaishu frowned and looked towards the sound. She found it was her senior sect brother, Xiang Miao. This Xiang Miao had joined the sect a year earlier than her and was honest. Usually, he was steadier than her, but right now he was in a state of shock and panic. She couldn't help but ask, Senior sect brother Xiang, what happened? Why are you so panicked? 111. Xiang Miao's face was red, and his breathing was rapid. His emotions were too strong. He said, 1, 3 times, but could not say anything else. Nangong Saishu's eyes suddenly lit up. Her breathing paused, and she instinctively shouted, Has Ding Ning really reached Realm 2 and reached energy refinement in a month? When the students heard Nangong Saishu's words, their first reaction was to feel it was impossible. But Xiang Miao's reaction caused the scene to sink into absolute silence. Everyone seemed to be frozen by the cold north wind. Xiang Miao breathed heavily and nodded. Ku Shichuan's mocking expression froze on his face. His fingers also froze. He felt a great shock and absurdity that caused his mind to ring. This is true. A loud exclamation came from Xie Changxing's mouth and broke the silence. The emotions on his face were very complicated, like a painting that had been painted with all kinds of colors. Xiang Miao nodded again. At this time, he was finally able to speak. He struggled to say, White Goat Cave just sent news. Ding Ning has had a successful breakthrough and reached energy refinement realm. Ku Shichuan's face started to pale, his stiff fingers trembling slightly. He did not need to verify anything, because this news was too shocking. Xiang Miao must have verified it before coming in to announce it, but no one noticed his expression at this time. Everyone's eyes involuntarily gathered on Xie Ro, who was beside Xie Changsheng. Everyone wanted to know what she was going to say. Xie Ro's face was snowy white, her eyelashes trembling. The domineering and strict sister seemed to have become a weak and pitiful young girl that needed to be relied on. Nangong Kaishu felt even happier. She wanted to laugh out loud. Yet, to her and everyone's surprise, Xie Ro's weakness turned to toughness in a moment. Her lips were still trembling, but the lines on her face turned cold and hard. The words of the Xie family of Guanzhong are as good as gold and will not change. Since Ding Ning has a breakthrough today and reached energy refinement in a day, I will keep my promise and marry no one but him. Everyone present wanted to see her make a fool of herself. Even her younger brother, Xie Changsheng, was like this. However, as these two sentences left her mouth, everyone present was shocked by her. Xie Changsheng was completely stunned. Was this for real? What made everyone present speechless again was that a clear and melodious sound rang out. She pulled out the long sword at her waist. Her sword was thick, heavy, and straight, completely unlike the swords women usually used. The blade and edge were gray-black, like the color of half-burned coal. The straight spine of the sword was bright white. This black and white sword, no matter if it was the hilt, the shape, the size, or even the scabbard, was most in line with the standards and etiquette of the Guanzhong region. Swoosh, a light sound was heard. The long sword in her hand gently sliced through the cold air, and a strand of her hair. A strand of black hair floated down and landed in her hand. The eldest daughter of the Guanzhong Xie family, Xie Ro, swears here. Her cold voice rang out once more, shaking one's heart. Everyone was shocked, speechless. No one had expected this Guanzhong woman's personality to be so strong that she would swear such a heavy oath in front of everyone. Zhang Sun Qianxue was silent for a moment, and then said without emotion, "You and your master are not the same kind of person. He only knows how to think for himself." Ding Ning was stunned. In the years he had spent with Zhang Sun Qianxue, he was extremely familiar with Zhang Sun Qianxue. Unless it was a very special occasion, Zhang Sun Qianxue would not mention that person of her own accord. While Zhang Sun Qianxue did not have any obvious emotions on her face, he could sense the different emotions in Zhang Sun Qianxue's eyes. In these few short breaths, his body unconsciously trembled. He thought of what today was for Zhang Sun Qianxue. There were many special days in a person's life. For example, when they first met, when they parted, when they would never see each other again. However, these were very special days to him. Others might not even know about them or remember them. Ding Ning's body froze slightly. He looked at Zhang Sun Qianxue and said softly, "Does that person really only think for himself?" "At least in the eyes of others." Zhang Sun Qianxue looked at the flickering candlelight and said, "At least in the eyes of others, he will do anything for his own thoughts." It was truly late autumn, just a hair's breadth away from the first snow. Many of the tall trees in the valley only had a few yellow leaves left on their branches. Looking down from above, there were fewer obstructions. They could admire the wild chrysanthemums in the forest and also the swords. This was a good time to observe the ceremony. In the morning, all the students of the Green Vine Sword Academy and the students of the 20 or so academies who had come to watch the ceremony had finished washing up and were waiting for the arrival of the White Goat Cave students. Yet, the first to break the silence of the Green Vine Sword Academy was not a carriage from White Goat Cave, but a galloping horse. The dusty, short-haired man on the horse was wearing a dark, purple military officer's uniform, with a fierce tiger embroidered on his chest, when he was still dozens of feet away from the gates of the Green Vine Sword Academy. This rider seemed to think the galloping horse was too slow. He flew up and landed in front of the stone stele at the gates of the Green Vine Sword Academy. "I have something to see Nangong Kaishu." Facing the numerous Green Vine Sword Academy students who had been preparing to receive the White Goat Cave people, this cold man with a weathered face said simply and politely, "A general in the military wants to see me?" Nangong Kaishu, who had been waiting quietly among the students of the Green Vine Sword Academy, thought of a possibility the moment she received the news. Her heart beat violently, and she almost sprinted to the gates of the Green Vine Sword Academy. "Uncle Hua Qingfeng, Seeing the short-haired man standing at the gates, Nangong Kaishu exclaimed in shock, "Why have you come? Isn't it because your letter is more urgent than Changling's military orders?" Seeing the shocked Nangong Kaishu, this short-haired general smiled, slightly. He took out a jade box and handed it to her. "Also, this pill medicine is slightly domineering. Your father fears that you will not care enough just by writing a letter. I happen to be passing through Chongling on military business, so he told me to come and tell you in person." Nangong Tsaishu's breathing paused, slightly. The moment she took the jade box, her palms were covered in sweat. "What pill medicine is this that you have to come personally?" "This is the Yellow Court Gold Pill of the former Han Dynasty's Yellow Court Pill sect." Hua Qingfeng put away his smile and said seriously, "The Yellow Court Pill sect was not very famous before the Han Dynasty was destroyed, but the pills they made were mostly unorthodox and unusually violent. This Yellow Court Gold Pill's effect in increasing cultivation is astounding. It is enough for a cultivator who has just entered Realm 2 to reach the later stage of second-class bone washing. However, the medicinal power of this pill is extremely mixed. Many of the medicinal powers are deeply rooted in the body. After reaching vital energy realm, the vital energy will not be so pure." Nangong Kaishu hesitated. Many impurities could not be expelled from the body of cultivators. This would cause many problems in the future. If the vital energy was not pure enough, it would affect the power of the vital energy. It would be like the cultivation method would drop in grade. For normal cultivators, the disadvantages of this pill outweigh its advantages. That's why your father specially had me come to see if you've really broken through, if this pill is really just for trade and not for your own use. He's actually very worried that you're stuck at that juncture and have become impatient." Hua Qingfeng looked at Nangong Tsaishu's smooth skin, and his expression relaxed slightly. "When I saw you, I was reassured. Ordinary cultivators." Nangong Kaishu had been hesitant, but when she heard Hua Qingfeng's words, her emotions suddenly calmed. She thought of Ding Ning's body and how he did not have much time. She thought of how Ding Ning seemed to only be able to manage the matters in front of him and not the matters in the future. She did not say more, nodded, and then opened the jade box in her hand. She saw a white-sealed wax block inside the jade box. At the center of the wax block was a yellow pill the size of a longan. It looked elastic, but also gave off a heavy feeling. This was a pill medicine that had come much later than she had expected, but it was unusually timely for it to arrive now. Nangong Kaishu spoke a few more words with the military general who had watched her grow up. She asked about her parents' recent situation and spoke of her cultivation. The general, completely reassured, left without worry. He also noticed Nangong Kaishu in the crowd, so he looked pleadingly at Nangong Kaishu, wanting to understand what was going on. "Yesterday, my elder sister swore in front of everyone that if you really broke through to the Qi refinement realm yesterday, she would marry no one else but you. Therefore, you are naturally my brother-in-law." Xie Changsheng had already spoken while looking at him. "You are not joking?" Ding Ning stilled. He wanted to laugh, but could not. "This joke is too big." "This is not a joke." A clear female voice rang out. All of the noise in the area disappeared. This was the main character speaking. Everyone's gaze gathered on Xie. Even most of the people present at the Green Vine Sword Academy temporarily forgot about the Sword Trial Festival and wanted to see how this matter would end. Ding Ning looked dazedly at Xie. He started to understand that this was the sister Xie Changsheng spoke of, the eldest miss of the Guanzhong Xie family. Xie's blush had faded. Her face was very white and flashed with a porcelain-like light. Xie Changsheng silently took a few steps back to Su Hashan, Nangong Kaishu, and the others. What are you doing? Su Hashan and Nangong Kaishu whispered in his ear in puzzlement. They even felt that Xie Changxing's eyes were filled with schadenfreude. I did it on purpose. Xie Changxing lowered his voice. The gloating expression spread from his eyes to his face. Marriage is not a trifling matter. Not to mention that Ding Ning did not know her before, even if Ding Ning agreed. Marriage is not something she can decide on her own. This is all nonsense. Father will not agree to her actions. If she makes a big fuss, she may be taken back to be beaten. These years, Father felt that she was steady and had her manage me. Now, I will let Father know that she is even more mischievous. At that time, she will not be the one to discipline me. Maybe she will take money from me. Su Hashan and Nangong Kaishu were speechless. After a long time, Nangong Kaishu finally said, "Everything is for you to have money to spend. In the end, you pushed your sister to the center of the storm. Is she really your sister? When she beats me and stops me from spending money, I don't know if she treats me as her younger brother. Of the 10 times I was beaten, at least 9 times she complained to Father." Xie Changxing twisted his mouth. "This time, it is not my fault. She made a fuss. Otherwise, I would have earned at least 1,500 gold and taught her a lesson. You are younger than us and more childish than us." Nangong Kaishu took a deep breath and said seriously, "Fortunately, I do not have a younger brother like you. Otherwise, I would beat you every day." Chapter 61. Ding Ning frowned slightly. Zhang Sun Qianxue was right. This Chongling was full of grievances. If one stepped in, they would be entangled in countless grievances. Right now, the grievances were difficult. If there was a debt of affection, it would be even more troublesome. He did not know what to say when Xie Ro looked at him and said, "I have drawn my sword and cut my hair to swear. Many people here can be witnesses, so this is not a joke." Ding Ning looked at her cold face that flashed with porcelain light. His expression grew stern. He said softly in a voice that only he and Xie Ro could hear, "I understand that some people keep their promises, and some people view the reputation of their family as more important than their lives. But we have never met before. For a wager that others may not take seriously, is this not too stubborn? Also, I heard that the Xie family is not an ordinary family. Your family may not agree to your actions." Xie Ro looked at his stern and calm gaze. She inexplicably felt much calmer. Maybe this youth was extraordinary in some way. At least, he did not disappoint her. Being arbitrary in my actions and speaking nonsense is my fault. I should take responsibility. She looked into Ding Ning's eyes and said softly, "I will be responsible for getting my family to agree." Ding Ning's brow furrowed even deeper. He bowed his head slightly, and his gaze landed on his last flower remnant sword. His heart trembled slightly at this moment. Xie Ro was a young girl who had not cultivated for many years, but her seriousness and gaze caused him to inexplicably think of the master of the last flower sword. "The crux is your opinion." Xie Ro hesitated slightly, but then her gaze became determined again. She said sincerely, "We have only met for the first time, but I like your calmness more than the young talents around you. Feelings can be slowly nurtured. I only hope that you will not feel this is too sudden, and do not think about family status." Ding Ning increasingly felt that Xie Ro and the master of the last flower sword were similar. If this was a coincidence, then he did not like this kind of coincidence. So he took a deep breath and hardened his heart. He said decisively, "This is not possible. I will not accept your suggestion, so do not have such thoughts." Xie Ro's face paled even more. She bit her lips and stubbornly did not speak. Ding Ning raised his head and looked deeply at her. "I will never marry you, so it's best that we don't mention this matter again, and let everyone slowly forget about it. Xie Ro's eyes reddened slightly. She was just a young girl. She did not know how much courage it took to make such a decision, but she took a few deep breaths, her chest rising and falling violently. Then she bowed deeply to Ding Ning. I was wrong in this matter. You cannot marry, but I cannot not marry. After saying this, she turned and walked back to where the spectating students were gathered. Ding Ning's heart suddenly sank. Other people might not be able to understand, even if they heard the words, but Ding Ning immediately understood Xie Ro's gaze when she turned around. She was even more unyielding than he had imagined. She would not force him to marry her, but she had to marry him. So if he did not marry, she would not marry. She would not marry anyone else. This seemed laughable. But Ding Ning could not laugh at this moment. Actually, she is a good match. Li Daoji and the surrounding people had maintained their silence. But at this moment, he turned around and sent his voice into Ding Ning's ears. The Xie family of Guanzhong is rich and will be of great help to your future cultivation. I am very satisfied with her appearance and conduct. I suggest you seriously consider it. You still want to make trouble. Is there a sect uncle like you? Ding Ning said angrily. How old am I? I just started cultivating. I have not even seen what the Green Vine Sword Academy looks like. Suddenly, someone comes out and talks about marriage with me. Li Daoji glanced at him and interrupted his words. The Green Vine Sword Academy and other sites can be seen slowly, but some people will not be seen again after you miss them. Ding Ning grew angrier and said, Is it really good for her to do this? As an elder, you can see her stubbornness. What you need to do is to think of a way to persuade her to give up this idea in the future. Also, if you really like her, you can have her marry you. Li Daoji rarely saw Ding Ning so angry. He smiled slightly. I want to, but she does not like me. Ding Ning immediately felt angry. Sister, I did well in this matter. Can this be considered a formal greeting between you and brother-in-law? Looking at Xie Ro, who walked back, Xie Changshen pretended to be sincere. Xie Ro's expression was normal. She glanced at him and said, childish. Xie Changshen did not expect Xie Ro to spit out 2 words so simply. The pride in his heart suddenly disappeared. Su Hashan and Nangong Kaishu inexplicably felt good about Xie Ro. The two looked at Xie Changshen and sighed softly. Careless friends. In the eyes of Duanmu Lian and some teachers of the Green Vine Sword Academy, Xie Changshen's actions were a farce. But due to his status as an outer-school student who had come to watch, they could not scold him directly. But when they thought of how the solemn sword trial festival at the Green Vine Sword Academy was tainted by such an atmosphere from the start, their expressions grew uglier. It is about time. Principal D is waiting at the back of the mountain. The sword trial festival can start at any time. Shui, do you want to rest or go now? Duanmu Lian did his best to not be affected by his bad mood. He went forward and bowed to Shui Wangshu from a distance. Seeing the white-haired Shui Wangshu, all the young geniuses who had come to watch felt a chill in their hearts. They realized that this old man was a Realm 7 cultivator that they looked up to, just an old man with 1 foot in the grave. He just came to watch. Li Daoji is in charge of everything here. There is no need to ask for my opinion, Shui Wangshu said with a smile when he heard Duanmu Lian's question. It would be good if an old man with 1 foot in the grave had just come to watch. If they did not have a Realm 7 cultivator like you, Green Vine Sword School would not feel restrained and unable to act freely today. Duanmu Lian cursed inside, but still maintained a cautious and polite expression. He nodded at Li Daoji. The journey is not far, and there is no need to rest. Cultivators do not have to worry about trifles. I think that everyone here feels that It is better to start as soon as possible. Li Daoji was in a good mood, a smile still hanging at the corners of his mouth. Then we will depart immediately. Duanmu Lian did not want to say more. He called down for the students participating in the trial to walk together, the students who were older and could not participate, and the outer school students to follow behind. Teacher Duanmu. At this time, multiple Green Vine Sword Academy students suddenly spoke. He Xiaoxi is not here. Hearing this name, Ku Shichuan, whose expression had been dark since Ding Ning's arrival, suddenly had a cold light in his eyes. He had never seen He Xiaoxi before, but he knew that He Xiaoxi was an opponent worth paying attention to. In the future, He Xiaoxi might be a threat to him during the Min Mountain Sword trials. Duanmu Lian stilled slightly. If any other student had not gathered at this time, he would be furious. But since it was He Xiaoxi who had not come, his expression improved slightly. He Xiaoxi. He turned and shouted towards the many halls of the Green Vine Sword Academy. His voice spread far away. Many breaths later, there was the sound of tearing air. A handsome young man in a thin green robe with an unusually well-proportioned body flew over from the path in the center of several stone palaces. White steam was still rising from his body. That was not the sweat on his body. The sweat on his body had long been shaken clean by his true qi. His clothes were also very dry and clean. The white steam was only because his body temperature had melted the surrounding white frost. Such a high body temperature meant that he had been doing intense training for his body. Thinking of the rumors about this person's hard work, Ku Shichuan's gaze grew colder. He is He Xiaoxi. Other than eating and going to the toilet, he spends almost all his time on cultivation. He knows that today is the Sword Trial Festival, but he did not want to waste time, so he was still cultivating and only came out now. Ding Ning was carefully examining this youth when Nangong Caishu's voice sounded next to him. Nangong Caishu had walked next to him. If you can avoid him in the trial, do your best to avoid him. Seeing Ding Ning turn around, Nangong Caishu spoke. While everyone's gazes were still on He Xiaoxi, she shoved the jade box she had been holding into Ding Ning's hands. This is the pill medicine my father managed to find. Ding Ning stilled. This was something he had not expected. It just arrived today. This is the Yellow Court Gold Pill of the Yellow Court Pill sect. My father had an uncle who is familiar with me come to tell me that this pill medicine is astounding in its ability to increase cultivation. If you use it with your present cultivation, you can reach the late stages of second-class bone washing. But there will be many negative effects, and your vital energy will not be as pure. Nangong Caishu said softly. Nangong Caishu whispered into his ear. I just heard my uncle say it, and did not have the time to study. So I feel that it is best for you to wait until after the Sword Trial Festival. After you thoroughly understand this pill, you can decide if you want to use it. Ding Ning nodded. While he had never heard of such an obscure pill medicine, he knew that he could use this pill medicine. With such a pill medicine in hand, he had more confidence in getting into the top 3 in the Sword Trial Festival. Chapter 62. Looking at He Xiaoxi flying over, Duanmu Lian's heart grew hot. The green vine thriving withering art that He Xiaoxi cultivated was the strongest cultivation method of Green Vine Sword Academy. It was especially wondrous, and in his view, the students of Green Vine Sword Academy and White Goat Cave could not compare to him in terms of understanding of some sword manuals. Today, this youth who was outstanding in all aspects would definitely shine brightly and spread the reputation of Green Vine Sword Academy. You should have taken the time to cultivate. Now, there are so many people waiting for you. You are too impolite. So while he scolded, there was not much sternness on his face. He Xiaoxi did not speak. He bowed in apology, and then lined up next to the students of Green Vine Sword Academy. Not far from him, a student of Green Vine Sword Academy had a cautious expression and unconsciously gripped the hilt of his sword. It was Emo Chen. The sunlight grew stronger, and the morning mist in Green Vine Sword Academy dissipated. Everyone followed behind Duanmu Lian and the others. They passed through Green Vine Sword Academy and climbed to Heavenly Bamboo Peak. The Sword Trial Festival was held at the bottom of Heavenly Bamboo Peak. The Green Vine Sword Academy had 5 or 6 peaks between Heavenly Bamboo Peak and the slightly shorter Metal Sword Ridge. The distance between these peaks was more than 1,000 feet. Yet, the Green Vine Sword Academy used ropes at the start and vines to wrap around each other. After hundreds of years, countless vines were tied together and formed a dozen vine bridges big enough for carriages to pass through. A wide viewing platform was built at the center of these vine bridges. Some spirit grasses and flowers were planted at the edges of the platforms. From a distance, it was like a pavilion in the air, a celestial residence in the heavens. The dean of the Green Vine Sword Academy, Di Qingmei, stood on a viewing platform closest to the Heavenly Bamboo Peak. His green robe fluttered in the wind as he flew over. Seeing Duanmu Lian, Li Daoji, and the others coming up the stairs, his gaze did not linger. He only nodded slightly when He Zhaoxi appeared in his sight. Then he saw Ding Ning next to Nangong Kaishu. Seeing that Ding Ning was clearly younger than the other White Goat Cave students, he understood that this should be the wine shop youth called Ding Ning. Thinking of how this wine shop youth had reached energy refinement in a month, his brow furrowed slightly. But no matter how astounding his talent was, he had learned from the students of White Goat Cave that day that this wine shop youth only cultivated the most ordinary explanation of the spirit source way. So in his mind, Ding Ning was just a cub that did not pose much of a threat. Whether or not such a cub could grow up was still unknown. All participating disciples will enter from the entrances we have marked here. They must pass through the entire valley to reach the other exit. Inside, it is forbidden to travel in groups of more than 2. If they encounter each other, they can either fight or flee. There is a time limit of 3 days to pass through the valley. There will be 3 boundaries, and you are not allowed to leave early. Every day, at noon, we will use the 4 smoke signals as a signal. You must reach the area between the 4 smoke signals before sunset. Then you must stop in that area. At midnight, you can choose to rest or continue traveling. Duanmu Lian started to explain the rules loudly and clearly. Ding Ning had heard this before, but he still listened carefully. Due to the unification of Aries and Ivy this year, the number of students participating in the trial has doubled compared to previous years. Therefore, the difficulty has increased slightly. Every student will carry a token with them when they enter. They must fight at least once a day and snatch a token. Otherwise, even if they reach the designated area, it will be considered a failure. This year, the resting areas do not have ready food. Some beasts have been placed in the Sword Trial Valley. If they need to eat to replenish their strength, they must hunt on their own. But some of the beasts are not weak, and they must weigh the pros and cons before hunting. As these words rang out, a buzzing sound of discussion rang out in the arena. This is disadvantageous to all students who are not of high cultivation. Hearing the rules that were slightly different from the past, Nangong Kaishu turned around and looked worriedly at Ding Ning. She said softly, "It is especially disadvantageous to you because you have not cultivated for a long time. You have not trained your body much. This kind of rule will easily use up your strength, and your strength will not be able to keep up. You have to fight every day and use up your strength to find food. The further you go, the more disadvantageous it will be This kind of rule is beneficial to cultivators like He Xiaoxi, who are strong in all areas. But no one can say this is unfair. Ding Ning nodded and said softly, because this kind of trial is to select the students who are the strongest in all areas. Nangong Kaishu grew silent. Sometimes the so-called rules and fairness were like this. They appeared to be the same for everyone, but in reality, they were biased towards one person and then disadvantageous to that person. If there are rules, there will be ways to deal with them. Ding Ning saw her displeasure and said sincerely, "We are born in a world full of rules. We have to survive under the rules." Sister, this kind of rule seems to be disadvantageous to brother-in-law. But even more importantly, this is a very fair rule. Xie Changxing listened to Duanmu Lian's narration and turned to look irritatingly at Ding Ning, who was talking to Nangong Kaishu. Right, what do you think of brother-in-law? Very good. However, what he didn't expect was that Xie Ro wasn't angry. She seemed to have seen through his tricks and said mockingly, "I have confidence in him. He should be one of the last three." Xie Changxing stilled for a moment and said, angrily, "You changed too quickly? From the start, I had confidence in him and wanted to bet on him winning. You looked down on him, but now you have more confidence than me. He just entered energy refinement. White Goat Cave has Zhang Yi and Su Qin. Green Vine Sword Academy has He Xiaoxi, and Nangong Kaishu is not weak. Why do you think he will be in the top three?" I had not seen him before, so I made such a judgment. Xie Ro glanced at him and said, "But now that I have seen him, I naturally feel different." Xie Changsheng was almost speechless. "How is it different?" Xie Ro looked deeply at Ding Ning in the distance and said, "There is confidence in his eyes, not the kind that is faked, so he appears so calm. This is like buying something. Some people cannot afford it and will pretend to be able to afford it. But he has the confidence of someone who has a lot of money and knows that he can afford it no matter how expensive it is." Xie Ro slowly said, "Since I was 4 years old, I have seen all kinds of businesses in my family's businesses. I have seen many businessmen. I am sure my eyes are not wrong." Xie Changxing slapped his forehead and said in depression, "Is this business?" "The principle is the same." Xie Ro looked at him and shook her head. "You are too naive. You do not understand many principles. Maybe in the future you will understand." Xie Changxing was so angry his face paled. "How am I young?" Xie Ro said disdainfully, "It is not like I have never seen you bathe. You are young everywhere." "That was when I was young." Xie Changxing was so angry he trembled and was speechless. "You are just a brat. What do you know?" Xie Ro said solemnly, "Do not be proud because of this. I will explain some principles you do not understand to father." And after a pause, she turned her head and looked deeply at Xie Changsheng. She said, "I'm just a woman. In the future, I won't need to carry the burden of the family on my shoulders. If I mess around a little, father will let me do as I please. But you are different. You are a man." Chapter 63. Xie Changxing took a deep breath and said angrily, "Can you not always use such a lecturing tone?" Xie Ro laughed, her face giving off a cool light. She looked provocatively at Xie Changsheng and said, "If you do not want to be lectured by me, then at least surpass me in cultivation and beat me." Xie Changsheng clenched his fists, his face slightly pale. He said angrily, "I will definitely surpass you." Xie Ro continued to smile and said, "That would be best. Otherwise, if you cannot even defeat one of Li Lingjuan's retainers, that would be truly embarrassing." Xie Changsheng bowed his head and did not speak. On the stage, Duanmu Lian had finished explaining the rules of the Sword Trial Festival. Most people's gazes once again gathered on He Xiaoxi. Of all the students participating in the sword trial festival, He Xiaoxi, Zhang Yi, and Su Qin had the highest cultivation, all above Realm 3 second class. Maybe Zhang Yi and Su Qin were closer to Realm 3 first class than he was, but the difference would not be great. Also, He Xiaoxi's green vine thriving withering art may have unimaginable effects. In terms of physical strength, He Xiaoxi, who had spent a great deal of time on cultivation, was stronger. Under these rules, He Xiaoxi was naturally the most likely to win. Yet, among the many people watching, He Xiaoxi, Mo Chen did not think so. He knew that he would surprise everyone in this sword trial festival. All the students participating in the sword trial festival started to walk along the mountain path towards the entrance of the sword trial valley. No one checked if they had any hidden food on them, because in the next 3 days, all the students in the sword trial canyon would not be able to see the top due to the concealment of the formation. They would even get lost and take many unnecessary detours. However, the spectators above could see their every move clearly from the platform in the air. Ding Ning followed in the middle of the group. The mountain path grew wider as they went down, but did not reach the bottom of the valley. What appeared in front of them was a cliff about 10 feet down. There were hundreds of green vines hanging down from the cliff. Even though he had never seen the Green Vine Sword Academy's sword trial festival, Ding Ning could guess that all the students participating in the trial would fall into the canyon through these vines. As long as there was a slight difference in time, the formation below would naturally separate them. Duanmu Lian, who had walked to the cliff, did not waste words. He said sternly and coldly, "Everyone, pick a vine and go down, 20 breaths apart. You have to be careful." Nangong Kaishu looked at Ding Ning and said worriedly, "Do not be impatient." Ding Ning knew the true meaning of her words, so he smiled slightly and said, "You too. If you can't win, then run. In this kind of long trial, no one knows what will happen in the end." Nangong Kaishu pondered over the meaning of Ding Ning's words. Seeing that the students in front of her had started to slide down, she glanced at Ding Ning. "Are you going first, or should I?" Ding Ning said, "I am done." Nangong Kaishu looked at him and said seriously, "I hope you will always be before me." Ding Ning smiled slightly. "Thank you for your auspicious words." When it was Ding Ning's turn, Ding Ning's movements were slow and careful. He crouched down, grabbed the vine with both hands, and lowered his body. Then his legs clamped onto the vine like he was climbing a bamboo pole, and he slowly slid down. Seeing his figure slowly fall into the forest below, Nangong Kaishu, who had been waiting at the cliff behind him, was filled with deep worry. No matter what kind of cultivation talent and comprehension one had, some of the body's movements and reactions needed time to practice. Ding Ning's movements, compared to any other cultivator, appeared clumsy. Yet for Ding Ning, at this moment, the most difficult thing was to appear clumsy so that the spectators would not see that he was too agile. Today's battle was not like the battle against so many gangsters in the dark alley. This was his first official stop in front of the Chongling cultivators. He could not act without restraint. His feet landed steadily. After confirming that the grass below could hold his weight, he started to examine the surroundings. Looking down from above, this canyon filled with all kinds of giant vines was extremely clear. However, the numerous small trees and giant vines had separated countless maze-like passageways. However, at this moment, when he had truly landed in this place and his feet had stepped onto the soft ground at the bottom of the canyon, he saw that the surroundings were filled with a thin layer of fog. Furthermore, this fog wasn't an ordinary white fog, but a strange faint green color. This kind of mist did not appear to be a hindrance to things in the distance, but it had a strange light refracting effect. It caused everything nearby to be slightly distorted and blurry. The surrounding vines were completely different from when he looked down from above. Looking down from above, there seemed to be some empty space between the trees and vines. Yet, standing here, he saw that the trees and vines were tightly connected, and there were only some arched passageways. His ears were completely silent. Those students who came down around the same time as him should not be too far away from him, but he did not hear any footsteps at all. It seemed that the formation here also had the function of isolating sound. In this way, it would be very difficult to hide or pursue some enemies through sound. The probability of encountering a sudden battle would greatly increase, and at the same time, the difficulty of hunting beasts would also greatly increase. Because he had already experienced the sword trial festival once, he knew that this was not a competition where whoever walked faster would win. He walked even more carefully and slowly than Ding Ning. Just as he slowly walked past an opening that looked like an arch, numerous green vines suddenly reached out silently from the bushes behind him and rapidly approached his back. When these lifelike green vines were only a few feet away from his back, the extremely vigilant Zhao Qing finally reacted. With a fierce shout, his right hand pulled out the broadsword on his back, as fast as lightning, swinging it backwards with a backhand swing. Pop, 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 pop. The numerous green vines were all shattered into countless green fragments by his sword. But before he could breathe a sigh of relief, another green vine stabbed out of the bushes beside him like a sword. This green vine flashed with a cold light that was different from the green vines just now. Zhao Qing realized something, and his expression changed. His mouth once again burst out with a sharp shout, and the real qi in his body no longer stingily poured into the broadsword in his hand. Several straight seal lines on the broadsword in his hand lit up, and a snow-white sword energy flashed out of it. The sword energy at the front of the broadsword was especially strong. It was a ball of several square feet. It felt like he was not using a sword, but an axe. With a clang, the sword and vine met and gave off a metallic sound. His body swayed slightly, and this clearly different green vine was cut down by his sword. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt a chill in his heart. He subconsciously looked down at his feet. The fallen leaves under his feet suddenly jumped up like they were boiling. Multiple thin vines wrapped around his ankles, and in a flash caused him to lose his balance and fall forward. His broadsword flashed again, and he cut down at his feet. With multiple pops, the vines under his feet were all cut down, but at the same time, he could not block the vines that shot at him in time. He was dragged dozens of feet on the ground, and then hit a tree wall. More vines wrapped around him. Not to mention swinging his sword, even breathing became difficult, and his face flushed red. Zhao Qing gave a sorrowful cry. He was extremely unwilling, but he knew the only thing he could do now was to stay still and not struggle. Why is this year's sword trial festival so much more difficult than in the past? As such a question flashed through his mind, many people exclaimed in shock in the sword trial valley, but they were all isolated by a unique formation. Looking down from the viewing platform in the air, the mountain forest around the entrance to the sword trial valley had become a boiling green sea. Many people were fighting in a panic. Countless broken branches and leaves of the vines were flying everywhere. Chapter 64. On the other side of the viewing platform, a hint of joy flashed through Ku Shichuan's eyes. His gaze remained on Ding Ning. While the bet outside the Green Vine Sword Academy had not happened because of Xiero, he had spoken many words. Ding Ning's energy refinement in a month, and Xiero's public vow, the story of these days would spread through Chongling. The more outstanding Ding Ning's performance was, the more disgraceful his performance in this story would be. A disgraceful reputation. For a cultivator who had yet to officially step onto the stage of a dynasty would bring countless unfavorable consequences. So when he saw the difficulty of this year's sword trial festival and the traps that appeared along Ding Ning's path, he was filled with joy. In his view, it was absolutely impossible for Ding Ning to pass this test. Ding Ning would be eliminated at the entrance to the Sword Trial Valley. Li Daoji's expression was normal. Looking at the changes in the wall of vines around Ding Ning, he said softly inside, "You are so confident. You cannot let me see your ugly appearance at the first trial." Ding Ning sensed the changes in the wall of vines around him earlier than anyone else. His mental power could only cover a few dozen feet around him, compared to the mental power of cultivators above Realm 5 Spirit Thought Realm. It was pitifully weak. It was like some fine threads floating in the wind. But compared to cultivators of similar cultivation, his mental power threads were much finer. Zhao Qing, who was not far from him, only sensed the vines when they were a few feet away from his back. He had sensed it when the vines started to change. At the same time, he sensed an even stronger energy being channeled into a completely different vine deep in the wall of vines. With his true strength, he could draw his sword and cut off the vine that hadn't finished accumulating power. However, he knew very well that if he did so, it would definitely arouse the suspicion of the spectators and bring about countless troubles. So in this moment, he just went through the many sword moves of the wildfire sword in his mind, and then reached out to grip the hilt of the last flower remnant sword. At this time, the 3 green vines were a few feet away from him. This was a reasonable distance. So he attacked. The broken sword that was the size of a ruler slashed out like lightning. Because he had reached Realm 2, the many small and straight cracks on the sword suddenly filled with vital energy and gave off many soft hums. The seal scripts on the sword that were usually hidden in the dark green light that were hard to see with the naked eye also lit up. Pure, white light flowed through the seal scripts and floated upwards. On the dark green blade, it was as if many pure white jasmine flowers had bloomed. Ding Ning's eyes suddenly showed some sadness. He did not retreat a single step. He drew his sword as if he was already at the end of his road. A shadow of a sword appeared beside him. The 3 green vines were cut. It was as if Xie Changsheng had seen some kind of monster. His mouth suddenly opened to the extreme, revealing a deep throat. Xie Rou's eyes quickly filled with joy. Gasps of disbelief could be heard from the viewing platform. Ku Shichuan's smile froze on her face, unspeakably ugly. At this time, the vine wall around Ding Ning trembled violently. Dozens of shattered vine leaves sprayed out. Then a thick vine that flashed with a metallic light stabbed towards Ding Ning's chest like a sharp sword. The powerful force of this thick vine even brought out a visible gust of wind. Yet Ding Ning advanced instead of retreating. Behind him was his end, because at this time, numerous thin vines had shot out of the fallen leaves behind him. But because he had advanced in this moment, he had put some distance between him and these thin vines. The last flower remnant sword in his hand once again formed a dense patch of sword shadows. As he moved forward, pieces of vine skin flew into the air and danced around him like wood shavings. However, the thick vine, which was obviously stronger than him, was still unable to entangle him. At the same time, another round of gasps sounded. This thick vine suddenly split into several strands of white silk, softly spreading out in front of him. Ding Ning calmly turned around and swung his sword. The numerous thin vines on the ground were cut apart by his sword. No more vines appeared around him. He put away his sword and continued to advance. In an inconspicuous corner of the viewing platform, Shui Wangshu once again pulled off several white whiskers. He had heard Li Daoji say that Ding Ning had a deep understanding of the Wildfire Sword Manual and had a deep mastery of the sword. Before the Sword Trial Festival, he had not ordered Ding Ning to use the sword in front of him. At his age, he seemed to be entertaining himself most of the time, and it was more interesting to have some anticipation. Yet he had not expected Ding Ning to have such mastery of the Wildfire Sword Manual. Li Daoji's expression did not change, but his eyes were filled with pride. He thought, of all the students here, which one of them could reach such a level in such a short time? As the thick vine was cut into white threads by Ding Ning, Ku Shichuan's face turned from pale to bloody red like he had been slapped twice. He was much stronger than the students of the other schools on the viewing platform, so he knew better what had happened in those few short breaths. Ding Ning cut off the 3 green vines with several sword moves, such as chopping, dragging, and flicking. Then he used several more exquisite sword moves, such as entanglement, guiding, and knocking to cut off the hard skin of the thick vine, making it so that the thick vine could not wrap around his body. Li Daoji, or Shui Wangshu, must have spent a great deal of time on him. The Wildfire Sword Manual only had complex sword forms, and was not like some profound sword manuals that were hard to comprehend just by the combination of vital energy and vital energy. Ding Ning was still calmly moving forward. Many people on the viewing platform looked at Xiero and Ku Shichuan. While they found it hard to believe, they could not help but think that if Ding Ning really had such terrifying talent, Xiero's oath was establishing a special connection between herself and Ding Ning. At the same time, Ku Shichuan, who did not think highly of Ding Ning and did not even feel he was on the same level as Ding Ning, what should he do? Feeling the gazes of the people around him, Ku Shichuan found it hard to control his emotions. He could not help but say coolly, no matter how nimble the vine is, it cannot compare to a cultivator's sword. Su Hashan's brow furrowed deeply. Young people were naturally more angry. He felt that before Ku Shichuan did not understand Ding Ning at all and had not seen Ding Ning with his own eyes, it was reasonable for him to say those words at the gates. Ku Shichuan was the best student of the Shadow Mountain Sword Cave in decades. He cultivated to profound understanding in a month, and then used 3 months to reach Realm 2 energy refinement. Of all the students present today, Ku Shichuan should be the strongest, and not just by a little. But Su Hashan thought that since Ding Ning had reached energy refinement in a month and just now had displayed astounding sword skills, then no matter what, Ding Ning had proved his abilities. What you're saying is pointless. So he could not help but speak. He looked at Ku Shichuan and said coolly, at least from everything that Ding Ning has shown so far, he has surpassed most of us present. You look down on him, and you look down on all of us. Also, do not speak too confidently at any time. If the cultivator he faces later is equally outstanding, you will be put on the spot. Su Hashan's words were not polite. Other than coldness, Ku Shichuan could not help but show some viciousness. His lips moved slightly, but he did not speak immediately, because at this time he and all the spectators saw Ding Ning and a hurrying student get closer and closer. The two were about to meet. Ding Ning was about to encounter the cultivator's sword. As he ensured that he could stand firmly in the next moment, his sword suddenly shook, and he raised it to meet Ding Ning's remnant sword. While they could not hear the sound, everyone on the viewing platform could see the hot air around his red longsword explode. The crimson red on the sword quickly faded, and the fire that had been floating on the surface of the sword suddenly spread outwards. The thick vines that had been pinned by his sword quickly turned black and were about to burn. Ding Ning's remnant sword cut into the dark and hot flames. His physical energy flowed into the seal scripts on the inky green sword and formed blossoms of pure white sword energy. Clearly, there was a great difference in power compared to these flames, and the blossoms were extinguished. The burning heat caused his skin to feel burning pain, but he did not put his sword away. His blade clashed with the dark flame longsword, but almost no sound was produced. In this moment, the inky green remnant sword in his hand was like a slippery fish. It slid along the blade of the dark fire sword and cut towards Yu Lian's fingers. Yu Lian felt great disbelief. Had the other practiced with the sword for a long time before cultivation, and was able to make such a reaction at this time? His face instantly turned incomparably pale, and the sword in his hand instantly rotated by half a circle. There was a soft sound. Ding Ning's remnant sword was knocked back several feet. Snap, 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 snap. Countless whip-like sounds came from under his feet. Multiple thin vines wrapped around his ankles. They could not drag him away, and only created a cloud of dust. Ding Ning's expression was still calm. His feet moved lightly, and the inky green remnant sword once again bloomed with many pure white flowers as it cut towards Yu Lian's wrist. If this was any other time, Yu Lian would have many ways to dodge this attack, and even counterattack with his sword. But his sword was in a stalemate with the thick vine. His body was firmly nailed into the ground. If he raised his foot, he feared that he would be dragged away by the thin vines in the next moment. He had no other choice but to abandon his sword. Otherwise, his wrist would be cut off by Ding Ning's exquisite sword. Yu Lian released his sword hand, and his body trembled slightly. There was a soft sound. Ding Ning's sword light turned and caught the hilt of the dark fire sword. He immediately flicked the sword out of the thick vine and out. At the same time, he dodged to the side without stopping. As the thick vine was wrapped around Yu Lian's body, he moved towards the wall of vines again. The remnant sword in his hand once again created dense sword light. In a few breaths, he cut through the thick vine. The severed vines fell from Yu Lian's body to his feet like several coils of thick hemp rope. With Yu Lian's power, he could break the thin vines under his feet. But he did not have a sword in his hand. It gave them the feeling that many cages containing these creatures had opened at the same time and released them as the smoke beacons ignited. Pah! The black shadow fell heavily to the ground and created a spray of dust and fallen leaves. Most people on the viewing platform still did not see what this thing was, but Ding Ning could not help but frown and say softly to himself, "So it is you thinking of eating your flesh. I feel somewhat disgusted." The dust and fallen leaves scattered. Many students on the viewing platform finally saw clearly and exclaimed in unison, lying in the pit, staring at Ding Ning with bloodshot eyes, was a giant black lizard. There were many giant lizards in the mountains, but none of them had scales as hard as this one. The scales on the giant lizard in front of Ding Ning looked like black iron. Each piece was as thick as 2 or 3 copper coins. It looked like it was wearing a special layer of armor. So this was the armored lizard unique to the Ba Mountains. In the Ba Mountains, this armored lizard had another name, the corrosive poison lizard. This kind of lizard could eat any rotten food. Its saliva and gastric juices were filled with all kinds of powerful toxins. Ding Ning was confident he could kill a giant lizard like this. But when he thought about how he would waste a lot of time and be very tired to eat something like this as food, he could not feel happy. He Xiaoshi. Multiple exclamations sounded from the viewing platform. Coincidentally, several hundred feet away from Ding Ning, a giant lizard like this had appeared in front of He Xiaoshi, whom many people from the Green Vine Sword Academy had been following. "This is an armored lizard." Su Hashan turned to look at Xie Changsheng and said gravely from the viewing platform, "It looks like energy refinement realm cultivators cannot cut through its scales unless it is an especially sharp sword." Xie Changsheng frowned and said, "There are scales on its eyelids. It seems its open mouth is its weakness. If you really want to do this, you are finished." Su Hashan shook his head and said, "Its teeth are much harder than its scales, and its biting speed is faster than any other part of its body. Moreover, Its biting strength is even more astonishing than the strength of its four limbs. Even if you can stab its throat, it can still bite your sword. Many swordsmen who do not understand it think its open mouth is its weakness and are killed by it. Xie Changxing's heart turned cold. He could imagine if a cultivator like him lost the sword in his hand and then faced this armored lizard, just how miserable the outcome would be. I hope brother-in-law will not be like me and want to stab its throat, he said sincerely. As he spoke, He Zhaoxi, the publicly recognized first student of the Green Vine Sword Academy, expressionlessly continued to walk forward as though there was nothing in front of him, and such a vicious beast did not exist. The armored lizard in front of him seemed to sense his disdain and gave off a strange roar. It jumped up like the armored lizard that had attacked Ding Ning. The pupils of many people on the viewing platform contracted. A layer of blue light suddenly appeared on He Zhaoxi's skin. Every muscle under his skin seemed to be moving, condensing a terrifying power. The ground under his feet silently caved in, and he leaped up. His figure instantly appeared above the armored lizard's head. He pulled out the long sword on his back and slashed down. His long sword was a peculiar yellowish color, completely resembling a yellowish wooden sword. Yet, when the sword landed on the armored lizard's head, it was like an enormous mountain was falling down. Everyone could see a ring-shaped ball of air explode above the armored lizard's head. Then the armored lizard landed on the ground, burrowing several feet into the ground and creating a ring-shaped wave of energy. Xie Changxing's eyebrows jumped, and the corners of his mouth twitched. This was a brute force response without any fancy tricks. He could imagine the power of this sword strike. Even if this armored lizard didn't die, its head would have been shaken into a ball of paste. He Zhaoxi was too strong. At the same time, the armored lizard facing off against Ding Ning moved. A wild wind suddenly rose from the ground. The fallen leaves parted like waves. The armored lizard's abdomen was close to the ground, but its limbs moved at an astounding frequency. Its entire body was like a black blade sliding rapidly against the ground. 3 inches from the ground was always a dangerous place for cultivators. It was much harder to bend down and deal with attacks from the ground than to stand straight. Also, Ding Ning's sword was much shorter than other people's. Xie Ro's breathing suddenly stopped, because at this time, Ding Ning had already attacked. He bent down, and his sword was clearly heading towards the armored lizard's mouth. She didn't even dare to look at the following scene. But in the next moment, her eyes widened, and she gave an involuntary exclamation of surprise. Ding Ning's sword did not pierce the armored lizard's throat. His sword just brushed past the lizard's mouth. A section of its bloody tongue fell down. The armored lizard seemed to be calm, but it was as if someone had hit its nose with a giant hammer. Its body suddenly stiffened, and it couldn't help but shrink back. Blood, mixed with smelly saliva, flowed out of its mouth. Su Hashan and Xie Changxing's gazes had just turned to this side, and their minds had just flashed with thoughts of how Ding Ning should deal with this when such a scene stunned them again. This was something they had never thought of. Ding Ning had cut off the armored lizard's tongue with one blow. Even Li Daoji was stunned. He had not expected Ding Ning to attack like this. Chapter 67. As Ding Ning cut down like he was chopping wood, the 2 sides of the armored lizard's neck were cut open. Its body and front limbs moved slower and slower. In the end, when its head was about to fall off, it stopped moving completely. Ding Ning panted violently, limited by his cultivation. His arms were starting to ache. The exhaustion of his physical energy caused him to feel tired, but he knew he did not have time to stop. Looking at the bloody armored lizard, he squatted down and used the last flower remnant sword in his hand as a pry bar to pry off the scales on the lizard's back. Then he carefully started to cut the flesh. For him, it had been a long time since he had killed this type of beast for its flesh, so he still couldn't help but feel a bit disgusted. Most importantly, the armored lizard's organs, especially its stomach, were filled with poison and filth that could make cultivators sick. That was why he had to control his sword so that it didn't penetrate too deeply, so that he wouldn't cut through the organs when cutting the flesh. Seeing him carefully cut the flesh, a student from Baiyun Monastery, like Xie Changsheng, recovered from his shock. He could not help but sigh softly. He seems to know a lot. Su Heshan took a deep breath and said slowly, "There are many books in the alleys." Ku Shichuan's eyebrows rose again, and his eyes narrowed slightly. He knew that Su Heshan's words were a counterattack against him. This was an old saying of the Qin dynasty that had two meanings. One meaning was that people born in the alleys rarely had a chance to become cultivators, so most of them could only study and seek a way to become strategists. The other meaning was that it was precisely because it was harder for those who were born in the streets to become cultivators than nobles, that those who wanted to become cultivators would have an even greater thirst for cultivation knowledge. They would eagerly read any cultivation-related book they could find. So many cultivators born in the alleys knew more. Especially after they became cultivators, they would cherish all cultivation opportunities and work harder. Often, they would have great achievements. He started too late. Ku Shichuan thought for a moment. He felt that arguing over Ding Ning, who was still very far away from him, would be lowering his status. Thus, he finally calmed down and said softly. This sentence was very fair, and all the spectating students agreed in their hearts. They all fell silent. Even if Ding Ning had been born into an ordinary aristocratic family, with the talent he had shown, he could have stepped onto the path of cultivation 6 or 7 years ago. Moreover, his family would have given him all kinds of things that could help him in his cultivation. Yet, at his age, he had only cultivated for a month. Even though he had astounding cultivation talent, he was far behind He Zhaoxi, Ku Shichuan, and even Nangong Kaishu. Perhaps it was because of this natural gap of 6 to 7 years that he would always fall behind in all kinds of competitions in the future and would never be able to catch up. Su Heshan knew that this was the truth, and he couldn't refute it. He also sank into silence. However, he felt even more unjust, so he felt even more sullen in his heart, and his expression became even more unsightly. It's true that he started too late, but while we ordinary people walk, he ran with all his might. Yet at this time, a clear female voice with indescribable power sounded again and reached everyone's ears. Xiero spoke at this time. Her gaze never left Ding Ning's body. At this time, Ding Ning had finished cutting the meat from the armored lizard's back. The meat on the armored lizard's back was the thickest, and most disgusting to eat, but also the cleanest and safest. He dealt with the 2 pieces of meat he had cut, dripped off some of the blood, and used cloth and vines to carry the 2 pieces of meat on his back. Because time was tight for him, he started to run towards the area where the smoke was rising. These 2 strips of meat added up to just over 10 kilograms. But because his body was weaker than other cultivators, and just now he had experienced 2 fierce battles, especially after killing this armored lizard and cutting the meat, his breathing had not even stabilized, so it was especially difficult for him to run. Even the people on the viewing platform could clearly see Ding Ning's arms and legs tremble strangely. They could see his chest rise and fall violently as though it was about to burst. The hot breath coming out of his mouth and the steam coming off his body caused layers of white mist to form in front of and around him. At this time, almost all the White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy disciples who had not been eliminated at the entrance were far ahead of Ding Ning. Some of the people who had progressed the smoothest were even close to the edge of the smoke-filled area, and were about to reach the area they had to enter. Ding Ning lagged behind, feeling a little lonely. It was to the extent that everyone on the viewing platform could easily determine that with his current running speed, if there were no accidents, he would barely be able to enter the smoke-covered area before noon. But his difficult, tenacious, and calm running posture was enough to move people. They could feel a kind of power and resolve that many people did not have. Xie Ro's face was covered in a porcelain glow, but her eyes were as moved as the noon sun. Ding Ning had moved her. The light in her eyes moved even more people on the viewing platform. Ding Ning was running with difficulty. He was racing against time and chasing after the young geniuses of White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy, who were close to the area they had to reach. His body was close to its limit. As he breathed, there seemed to be a fire burning in his chest. He felt unspeakably sad, but his gaze was calm and cool, and he looked far ahead. What Xie Ro and everyone else on the viewing platform did not know was that his pursuit had more meaning. He was chasing after his own life and the powerful cultivators of Changling, the marquises, the empress, the two ministers, and the high and mighty emperor of the Qin dynasty, who had cultivated to realmate. Just as Ding Ning was running with difficulty, a man dressed in yellow official robes with python patterns stood with his hands behind his back on a training field in a military camp. He looked coldly at the distant streets of Changling. Because Changling was too large and he could not see the end, he appeared lost. This man's skin was smooth and gave off a yellow jade-like light. His forehead was wide, and his eyes contained a great presence, as though he could grasp the entire military camp at any time. He was naturally the general of the Tiger and Wolf Army, Liang Lian. At this time, a black-robed advisor in his 40s was standing next to him. Like the cultivator who had exclaimed that a general's success was built on 10,000 years of age, this black-robed advisor's hair was white, and his face was covered in the marks of wind and frost. "You really feel that I must do this?" Liang Lian looked into the distance and asked the silent and respectful advisor next to him. "General, you must do this." The black-robed advisor nodded and said softly. Liang Lian turned to look at him and said, "Using public resources for private purposes, using some methods to steal some resources from the people of Changling. Even if you fail, you will at most cause the displeasure of the Empress and the Holy One. But letting go of someone like Bai Shui, not being able to get the lonely mountain sword horde, and even attempting to collude with Bai Shui, this is a true rebellion. The Holy One will be furious, and many heads will be lost." The black-robed advisor's expression did not change. He said softly and respectfully, "General, you know better than me what your footing in Changling is. You and Bureau Chief Yi are the same. The reason you can live well and prominently is because the swords in your hands have enough weight, because you have value, and because you are strong." Liang Lian shook his head. "I am not like Yi Siling." The black-robed advisor also shook his head. "You had a relationship with that person. Since you betrayed that person, the Holy One will feel that you may betray him. So he has never trusted you like he trusted the 2 ministers and the 13 marquises. So do not think that you will be free of worries if you work for the Empress. If you really do as she and those nobles think, and let Bureau Chief Yi die gloriously in battle and get the lonely mountain sword horde for the Empress and the Holy One, then Bureau Chief Ye's path right now is your path." Liang Lian's expression did not change, but he remained silent. Chapter 68. His luck is really good. On the viewing platform, Ku Shichuan spoke slowly. It was noon. Under the gazes of all the spectators, Ding Ning, who was at the back, finally entered the area marked by the 4 lines of smoke. The moment he confirmed that he had entered the marked area, Ding Ning disregarded his image and sat on the ground. He took off the meat on his back and leaned against a small tree panting heavily. The sweat that seeped out from his skin instantly soaked his clothes. This time, Ku Shichuan thought his words were just as fair. If they encountered one or two more armored lizards along the way, Ding Ning would not be able to arrive in time, and would be eliminated. Yet the moment he said this, he felt the gazes around him were inexplicably cold. He frowned slightly and quickly understood why the people around him had such emotions. However, he only sneered in his heart. The hard work and persistence of the weak could gain the admiration and sympathy of many people, but the final result would not change. At this time, only 1/3 of the people from White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy had reached the designated area. 2/3 had been eliminated on the way from the entrance to the Sword Trial Valley. In his view, White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy were too weak compared to their Shadow Mountain Sword Cave. Xue Wangshu was sitting on a cushioned rattan chair at the edge of the viewing platform. His eyes were half closed, as though he was about to fall asleep. If he knew what Ku Shichuan was thinking right now, he would definitely object. The strength of a sect was not determined by the number of Realm 3, 4, or even Realm 5 cultivators, but by the top cultivators of the sect. Sometimes one true expert was enough. The autumn wind was cold, and the sweat-soaked clothing was more tiring, and it was easier to get sick. But Ding Ning's performance still won the respect of most people on the viewing platform. After a period of heavy panting, he started to try to make a fire. He prepared enough dried leaves and branches, and rolled a ball of dried grass into a ball. Then, he used the sword in his hand to knock on the stone, creating sparks. After igniting the hay, he kept blowing on it. In just a few breaths, the fire was burning brightly. The fire burned brightly and was warm enough. There was almost no smoke rising. After cutting off several green vines, he took off his soaked robes and picked them up to roast. At the same time, he skewered the 2 pieces of meat that were heavy for him. Some of the workers of Green Vine Sword School had finished preparing food. Many food boxes were set up on the mountain path near the viewing platform. At this time, the scene in the Sword Trial Valley had started to calm. Many students had started to hide to rest and replenish their energy. Originally, many of the spectating students already had thoughts of going to eat. However, right at this time, several cries of surprise sounded. As a result, the people who were originally about to cross the vine bridge and walk to the mountain path all stopped in their tracks. Near one of the pillars of smoke, 2 figures were about to meet. Moreover, both of them were likely to win in the end. One of them was tall and handsome. It was Su Qin of White Goat Cave. The other person was of ordinary stature, but there was no extra fat on his body. His movements were filled with indescribable power. It was He Zhaoxi, who had killed the armored lizard with 2 blows. The 2 were on each other's path. They were only separated by a patch of forest, and neither of them seemed to have any intentions of stopping to rest. If the 2 of them were to meet, who would emerge victorious? The breathing of everyone on the viewing platform involuntarily became slightly heavy. When the trees in front of them thinned, He Zhaoxi and Su Qin saw each other at the same time. The 2 stopped a dozen feet apart. Su Qin's brows furrowed slightly. His expression did not change, as his right hand slowly landed on the sword hilt at his waist. His knuckles were slightly white. He Zhaoxi's eyes narrowed slightly. He slowly pulled out the yellow longsword on his back. Yet in the next moment, Su Qin and everyone on the viewing platform narrowed their eyes. He did not prepare to attack, but cut off a piece of the armored lizard's meat. Just like Ding Ning, he had taken the meat from the armored lizard's back. However, he was much stronger than Ding Ning, so the amount of meat he cut off was twice as much as Ding Ning. After entering this area, he hadn't started a fire yet, so the meat on his back was still raw. At this moment, The piece of meat that was cut off was still dripping with blood. I know you. You are Su Qin. Your cultivation should be above realm 3 second class. Looking at Su Qin's cold words, he directly put this piece of raw meat half the size of a fist that was still bleeding into his mouth and started to chew and swallow. What is he doing? This action caused many people on the viewing platform to gasp. Xie Changxing turned his head and asked Su Heshan and Xie with a pale face. Thinking of the appearance of those armored lizards just now, he felt nauseous. Xie and Su Heshan shook their heads. With He Xiaoxi's personality, he would not use such a method to disgust or intimidate his opponent. Su Qin's gaze grew sharper. He looked at He Xiaoxi, who was eating raw meat, and said with slight disdain, I know a way for cultivators to digest large amounts of raw meat and not get sick even if they eat large amounts. That is intense exercise. Continuous, intense exercise to make the energies in one's body flourish, to make one's organs stronger, and increase one's body temperature. But even if you have such thoughts and feel that you want to fight me and then think of eating meat after seeing me, do you think I will have the patience to wait for you to finish eating this meat? He Xiaoxi continued to cut and eat the meat piece by piece. At the same time, he said, compared to you directly deciding the victor now, I feel there is a better choice. Su Qin sneered. What better choice? I do not want to waste time. The less time I spend on the first 5 realms, the more time I have for breakthroughs after realm 5. This is just a trial. I do not want to spend too much time here, He Xiaoxi said calmly. If it is something that can be resolved in 1 or 2 days, why wait until the 3rd day? Su Qin stilled. He thought of a possibility. He Xiaoxi looked at him and said, 2 lions catching sheep is much faster than 1 lion catching sheep. Su Qin's eyebrows were still raised. The coldness in his eyes did not lessen, but a hint of a smile appeared on his face. So, your suggestion is for us to hunt together? He looked with interest at He Xiaoxi. I do not know how much will be left before the sky turns dark. He Xiaoxi continued to eat raw meat, or we can decide the victor now. The corners of Su Qin's mouth curled up slightly as he looked up. I will accept your suggestion because I don't have much patience. Also, I don't like to be watched like a monkey. He Xiaoxi looked at the little forest in front of him and nodded. He said, with this as the boundary. Su Qin said coolly, with this as the boundary. He Xiaoxi did not say anything else. He continued to eat meat as though he wanted to finish all the raw meat in one go. At the same time, he turned and started to run. Su Qin also turned and started to leisurely advance. What are they doing? Xie Changxing asked with a cold expression. Even from so far away, he could see that He Xiaoxi was not running out of fear of Su Qin, but because the two had reached an agreement in their conversation just now. Divide and eat. Su Heshan took a deep breath and said slowly as he looked at Xie Changsheng. Xie Changsheng was stunned and then reacted. Indeed, if he could directly capture all the other competitors in this circle, this kind of trial could end directly, and it would not take 3 days at all. But this is also very dangerous, he said with an ugly expression. His expression was unsightly as he said, if you keep fighting, your condition won't be good. You might even get injured and lose to someone who is weaker than you. Su Heshan nodded and glanced at him. He said softly, you are right. But Su Qin is proud. He Xiaoxi is confident. Xie Changxing took a deep breath. Theoretically, Su Qin and He Xiaoxi's choice had nothing to do with him. The dull and boring time that followed would be greatly reduced. Chapter 69. This kind of trial is slightly childish, but because we are all childish students, this kind of trial and competition is very suitable for us. But He Xiaoxi is not childish at all. Xie Changxing's stomach also emitted a faint thunderous sound, but he was hungry. But he did not go to the mountain path to get food, and said to Suhashan, next to him. His words seemed a bit ridiculous and boring, but Suhashan could understand his feelings at the moment. Ding Ning and He Zhaoxi's performance must have given Xie Changsheng a great feeling. It seems we need to work harder. Otherwise, we will be left further behind by He Zhaoxi and Ku Shichuan. Suhashan nodded and then said softly, Nangong Kaishu and Ding Ning are in danger. Xie Changsheng took a deep breath and said seriously, while I know there is not much possibility, I still hope the two of them can win. In their worried gazes, Nangong Kaishu and Ding Ning happened to be on He Zhaoxi's side. Nangong Kaishu was walking in the thin mist. Compared to most people in this valley, she had been very lucky before. Other than encountering 2 vine traps, she had not encountered other White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy disciples, nor had she been attacked by armored lizards. However, this also meant that she couldn't rest today. She still had to find enough food, and at least one battle with the other disciples. Suddenly, she stopped walking, because at this moment, a low rumbling sound could be faintly heard in the wind. The formations in the Sword Trial Valley could cause the primal energies of the universe to become chaotic. Even sound waves would be disrupted to the greatest extent. Ordinary vibrations in the air and on the ground could not be sensed. At this time, she could clearly hear the low sound. This meant that the sound had been very loud and should be very close to her. He Zhaoxi, she thought for a moment, and almost instinctively called out this name. The wind suddenly picked up. Waves of faint blue mist were blown into thin muslin by the wind. A somewhat wild figure rushed out of the thin mist in front of her, carrying countless fallen leaves that were swept away by him. It really is you. Nangong Tsaishu's face was cold. Her right hand slowly moved to the sword hilt on her back. The wild figure stomped his feet on the ground. A circle of wind and waves rolled out, and he stood still. At this time, He Zhaoxi's chest was completely exposed. Fine beads of sweat seeped out of his slightly red skin and were immediately dried by his body temperature. His abdomen was still emitting the croaking sound of a toad. His eyes burned with fighting spirit. He looked at Nangong Kaishu and said sincerely, Actually, I did not want to meet you. It's only because he thinks that I have a chance of entering the top 3, not because he thinks that he can't defeat me. Fighting spirit burned in Nangong Tsaishu's eyes. She slowly pulled out her iron sword and held it in front of her. I don't like your way of thinking. Even if you want to give way, now that we have met, I think you must fight. Also, I have wanted to fight you for a long time to see the difference between us. But before I had a breakthrough, there was a major realm between us. I was afraid of losing so badly that I did not feel anything. He Zhaoxi held his yellow sword in front of him and said, I am in good condition, and my cultivation is higher than yours. So I will give you a handicap of 3 moves. Up to you, that is just what you think. Nangong Kaishu started to move. A wild wind formed under her feet, blowing away the dry leaves and dirt on the ground to reveal the hard yellow earth below. She started to charge in a straight line, just like when she had fought Li Lingjuan's subordinate, Chunmoli. But because she was in vital energy realm now, the scene was very different from back then. Streams of vital essence rapidly flowed out from her fingertips, continuously pouring into the fish-patterned iron sword in her hand. All of the fish scale patterns on this black iron sword began to be filled with a dazzling and viscous silver light. It looked as if the inside of this sword was filled with large amounts of silver water that was about to seep out from these patterns. However, it just could not seep out. The iron sword itself seemed unable to withstand this kind of power. The body of the sword that had been slightly bent due to the battle started to straighten and then started to tremble violently, giving off silver light. In a breath, this black iron sword seemed to become a large silver fish in Nangong Tsaishu's hand. Poof! The large silver fish swayed more violently in Nangong Tsaishu's hand. It finally broke free and jumped back into the water with a soft sound. All the silver light left Nangong Tsaishu's hand and flew forward. In the air, there was a fish-like silver sword light jumping forward towards He Zhaoxi, who was 50 feet away. The black iron sword was in Nangong Tsaishu's hand. Secret fish sword form. He Zhaoxi made a sound of surprise that Nangong Kaishu did not use the City Connect sword art passed down in the family. As he made a sound of surprise, he swung his sword forward, as though he was casually swinging it in the air in front of him. His withered yellow sword drew an arc in the air, but a bright and transparent sword energy lit up at the tip of the long sword. This sword energy flew in a straight line towards Nangong Kaishu at an astounding speed. In this moment, he did not defend and counterattacked. His sword was faster than Nangong Tsaishu's. It broke through the air and was less than 2 feet from Nangong Tsaishu's eyes. At this time, the large silver fish jumping in the air was still 10 feet away from him, facing the other's attack while Nangong Kaishu was still moving forward. This attack was the hardest to defend against. Nangong Tsaishu's pupils contracted violently. Fortunately, she still had a sword. When this bright and transparent sword light was only a foot away from her forehead, a green sword light finally flew out from her left sleeve. Several green vine-like sword lights finally blocked in front of this transparent sword light. There was an explosion. Nangong Kaishu instinctively closed her eyes and stopped her body. The shattered sword energy and wind blew her hair back, and even left bloody marks on her white face. Boom! It was also at this moment that she sensed that the silver fish was sent flying by a yellow turbid wave. A section of a yellow sword came out of the wave and slashed at her with astounding speed. At the start, He Zhaoxi had said he would let her have 3 moves. Now that the two started to fight, He Zhaoxi clearly did not give way. But Nangong Kaishu knew that this was not He Zhaoxi's deception. He Zhaoxi understood her intentions and chose to respect her. Before she could avert her eyes, she crossed her swords in front of her. Vital energy surged into the swords. A yellow ball of light, a silver and a green ball of light crossed in the air. Another muffled thunder sounded in the valley. A circular shockwave visible to the naked eye spread outwards and blew away the surrounding vines and leaves. He Zhaoxi's advancing figure stopped abruptly. The soles of his shoes gave off unpleasant cracking sounds. His cloth shoes shattered into many pieces. In front of him, Nangong Tsaishu's body was thrown backwards. She made a hole in the vines and bushes behind her as she fell hard to the ground. Blood sprayed on the ground in front of Nangong Kaishu, but she still gripped her swords tightly and did not let go of them. Beads of blood seeped out of her robes, but she did not make a sound. She struggled to stand up. He Zhaoxi's expression was grave, but he did not say anything. He held his sword in front of him and said seriously, "Please." Nangong Kaishu started to run again. Her body once again created a straight path in the mist. The sword hilt that was soaked in blood once again gave off a dazzling light. She attacked with both swords. The vital energy flowing into the seal scripts on the swords gathered some primal energies of the universe and flew out. A patch of green vines grew densely in front of her. Silver light flashed through the gaps between the green vines. But it was not a large silver fish charging out, but countless silver scale-like sword lights. It was harder to use 2 sword moves at the same time than one. This was why few people in the Green Vine Sword Academy could use dual swords like Nangong Kaishu. But facing Nangong Tsaishu's attack, He Zhaoxi only attacked once. His sword rotated horizontally and slapped forward horizontally. This seemed to be a method of using strength to break through the path. Yet the power of this blow was not enough to completely seal all of Nangong Tsaishu's sword lights. Therefore, many people in the stands who were watching this battle were puzzled. Yet, at this moment, He Zhaoxi's body underwent a strange change. The skin on the left side of his body turned yellow in an instant, while the right side of his body was full of vitality. It was like a tree with half of its body withered, and the other half absorbed the vitality of the other half and quickly grew. Boom! A powerful force suddenly gushed out from his right arm and poured into the yellow longsword in his hand. The yellow sword in his hand gave off countless vein-like light patterns, and its power increased greatly. Nangong Tsaishu's breathing stopped again. She did not have time to pull her sword back. An even more muffled sound occurred in front of her. Her feet left the ground once again, and a strong tremor passed from the sword hilt to her arm. Her sleeves were completely shattered, and the pieces of cloth flew out of her hands like butterflies. The powerful force sent her flying in an instant, and she fell even further away. Xie Changsheng and the others on the viewing platform were shocked. Many people opened their mouths, but no one spoke. Was this the power of the Green Vine Sword Academy's strongest thriving withering art? Ding Ning was eating roasted meat. When the first muffled sound reached his ears, he stopped and listened more attentively. When the second, even more oppressive sound was heard, he felt the ground tremble slightly. He frowned and stood up. Chapter 70. He had a goal that the young geniuses of Chongling could not even imagine, and cultivation experience that they could not understand. So just from the feeling of power from the first muffled sound, he was certain that one of them was He Zhaoxi, who had the most outstanding physical strength. As to the other person, it had to be one of Zhang Yi, Su Qin, or Nangong Kaishu. When two tigers fought, one would be wounded. This was also a rare opportunity for him. So he put on his dry clothes as quickly as possible. He did not even bother to eat the remaining meat and sprinted in the direction of the sound. At this time, everyone on the viewing platform was attracted by the battle between He Zhaoxi and Nangong Kaishu. Yet, some people still noticed Ding Ning's unusual movements. For example, Xiero. She found it hard to understand. In her opinion, at this time, Ding Ning, who was very weak compared to these experts, should be hiding and staying away from the battle. Why did he rush over at such a fast speed? The battle between Nangong Kaishu and He Zhaoxi had not finished. In the spreading dust, Nangong Kaishu struggled to stand up, her arms trembling. Her palms were covered in wounds. Every corner of her robe turned red and started to drip blood. She looked at He Zhaoxi in the mist in front of her. She knew that she could not win against He Zhaoxi in terms of physical strength and vital energy cultivation method, but she still wanted to try. Even cultivators of vital energy realm could not become a small pond that gathered primal energies of the universe in the Sword Trial Valley and could not replenish their vital energy. If both sides ran out of vital energy, then the only thing that would decide victory was pure physical strength, sword skills, and true battle experience. She wanted to see if her sword skills and true battle experience were as strong as He Zhaoxi's. So she spat out a mouthful of blood mixed with mud. She looked at He Zhaoxi and said, "You should not have much vital energy left. In the next attack, let everyone use up their vital energy." He Zhaoxi's eyebrows rose slightly. Nangong Tsaishu's strength did not exceed his expectations, but her willpower and determination to win had completely exceeded his expectations. Of course, he wasn't afraid of such a challenge. He took a deep breath and remained silent. Once again, he raised his sword and nodded. However, unlike the previous two times, he began to take the initiative to charge forward. The thriving withering art he cultivated didn't just have the mysteries of power conversion between withering and thriving. The vital energy stored in his energy sea was slightly more than ordinary cultivation methods. Adding on his powerful physical strength, even without using vital energy, he could defeat most Realm 2 cultivators. Therefore, he was confident he could harvest on the first day. But because there were people like Zhang Yi and Su Qin, he wanted to leave some vital energy. At this moment, he wanted to rely on his physical strength to face Nangong Saishu's challenge. His explosive power was astonishing. The place where his feet landed was full of craters. He had only sprinted for a distance of over 30 meters, but a terrifying gust of wind had already appeared in front of him. Large amounts of fallen leaves were swept up by the wind brought about by his body, forming a moving wall of fallen leaves. The withered yellow sword in his hand slashed forward. It seemed to be calm, but there was a sense of heat spreading from the tip of the sword. A line of fire landed on the wall of dancing fallen leaves in front of him. There was a loud boom. The fire borrowed from the wind, and the dancing fallen leaves started to burn fiercely. Under the compression of his sword energy, countless burning leaves were compressed into a very small space. When the hot air collided, an even greater pressure was generated, and an even greater power suddenly burst forth. Many Green Vine Sword Academy disciples understood where this sword came from. Fire from withered wood. This was one of the moves in the Withered Wood Sword Manual of the Green Vine Sword Academy. The Withered Wood Sword Manual was one of the most profound sword manuals in the Green Vine Sword Academy. He Zhaoshi's vital energy method was the best in the Green Vine Sword Academy, and his sword manual was also the most profound in the Green Vine Sword Academy. On the viewing platform, Ku Shichuan frowned slightly. He Zhaoshi's performance caused him to feel a faint threat. Seeing the ball of fire suddenly form in front of her, Nangong Kaishu hesitated slightly. But in the next moment, her gaze became determined. She ignored the pain of her broken flesh rubbing against the sword hilt and gripped the sword hilt even tighter. She channeled all the true essence in her body into her two swords. The fish-patterned sword slashed out of her right hand at an unusually straight angle, facing the withered yellow sword that was about to explode. Waves of energy continued to erupt from the sword. It was just one sword, but it was like countless waves were crashing like countless swords. This was what she was most skilled in, the city-connecting sword formula that pursued pure ferocity. There was a loud boom. The burning, withered leaves turned into tiny embers. The compressed ball of fire finally exploded at this moment. The straight fish-patterned sword suddenly stopped amidst the countless sparks. As the withered yellow longsword slashed down on its body, the iron sword bent once again. It could no longer stay in its master's hand and flew diagonally upwards. After sending Nangong Saishu's fish-patterned sword flying, He Zhaoshi's heart sank. A howl came out of Nangong Saishu's mouth. He sensed a powerful force pressing down on his sword again. This was Nangong Saishu's other small sword. But this sword also had the same ferocious city-connecting sword move. He shook his head helplessly. He channeled the remaining vital energy in his body into the sword in his hand. A great force hit the sword in his left hand. Nangong Kaishu, who had been prepared, jumped up. At the same time, her fingers relaxed slightly, raised back, and clenched again. Beads of blood sprayed out between the sword hilt and her hand. She still gripped the sword in her hand, but at this time she saw He Zhaoshi raise his head. His entire body was also shaking, but his knees were slightly bent, and his body didn't even take a single step back. The yellow sword in his hand paused for a moment in the air, and then slashed at her like lightning. Nangong Kaishu forced her sword down. There was a loud bang. Her sword still did not leave her hand, but the withered yellow sword lowered and pressed down, cutting past her waist. Blood gushed out from her waist, and half of her robes were soaked. Nangong Kaishu gave a sorrowful cry and flipped backwards. Her sorrowful cry was not due to pain, but due to strong unwillingness and helplessness. She had successfully forced He Zhaoxi to use the last bit of vital energy he had wanted to save. But she was still a thread short. That last thread of power caused her to be slower than He Zhaoxi and unable to seal his sword move. The sword wound at her waist was not serious and not deep, but if she continued to fight, she could not treat the wound. The large amount of blood loss would cause her to lose all ability to fight, and she would quickly fall unconscious. He Zhaoxi prepared to move again. Out of respect for Nangong Kaishu, he was not prepared to let her fight again. But at this time, a heavily panting voice sounded. "When we came in, I told you to run if you could not win. You had to fight so hard." On the viewing platform, Xie Changxing's gaze followed Nangong Caishu's body. Seeing more blood flow out of Nangong Caishu's body, his expression grew more nervous. At this moment, he suddenly discovered that there was another person near Nangong Kaishu and He Zhaoxi. When he saw the person's figure, he immediately screamed with an ugly expression, "Ding Ning, why are you here?" At this time, Nangong Kaishu judged who the newcomer was from the voice. Her expression was pleasantly surprised at first, but then turned to anger. Her shout sounded at almost the same time as Xie Changsheng. "Ding Ning, you also came to this area? What are you doing here?" What is Ding Ning doing here? Does he want to take advantage? Many people on the grandstand had just seen Ding Ning's arrival, and this thought came to their minds at the same time. "I'm here to take advantage of the situation," Ding Ning said as soon as this thought appeared in their minds. He looked at Nangong Kaishu and He Zhaoxi with a matter-of-fact expression. One is out of vital energy, the other is seriously injured. Is this not the best time to take advantage? Nangong Kaishu wanted to say something in anger, but Ding Ning looked calmly at her and said, "If you do not stop the bleeding, I fear that even the teachers of the Green Vine Sword Academy will come to stop your trial. I will not be able to take advantage." Nangong Kaishu was stunned. She still could not understand Ding Ning's actions, but she gritted her teeth and started to quickly stop the bleeding. No matter what happened next, if she did not stop the bleeding, the teachers of the Green Vine Sword Academy would immediately come to stop her trial. "You want to help her?" He Zhaoxi, who had been silent since Ding Ning appeared, saw something and looked at Ding Ning. Ding Ning shook his head. "This rule is not allowed." He Zhaoxi ignored his words and looked seriously at his eyes and the remnant sword at his waist. He said softly, "I am very happy that she has a friend like you, but you are too weak." Hearing the two's conversation, Nangong Kaishu shouted angrily, "Ding Ning, I do not need you to care about me. Run. Shut up and save your energy. Otherwise, I will be the first to take care of you." Ding Ning glanced at her and then turned to look at He Zhaoxi. "How do you know you cannot win if you have not fought?" He said calmly. Nangong Caishu's expression was ugly, and she wanted to attack Ding Ning. But Ding Ning's words and tone caused her to pause. "Also, I am already here. With my speed and stamina, I cannot escape even if I want to." But Ding Ning's next words caused her vision to darken, and she almost had the impulse to curse. Chapter 71. He Zhaoxi did not speak. Regardless of the opponent's strength and cultivation, some opponents were worthy of respect. He held his sword across his chest again and said solemnly to Ding Ning, "Please." Ding Ning also raised the last flower remnant sword and said with a smile, "Please." He Zhaoxi looked at Ding Ning, who did not want to attack first, and then at Ding Ning's short remnant sword. He could not help but frown, but in the next moment he just nodded and said, "All right." As soon as the word left his lips, he began to move. He flew straight at Ding Ning. His body was like a heavy stone thrown from a catapult, crushing the space in front of him with a loud bang. At the same time, he once again brought out a terrifying gale. The withered yellow leaves once again danced in front of him. He followed behind this wall that was flying towards Ding Ning and swung his sword. His vital energy had been used up. When he swung his sword, there were no more lines of fire on the blade. But as he exerted force, due to his terrifying speed, his sword still gave off terrifying power. The straight blade in his hand was quickly bent into an arc by this power. The moment it straightened again, there was an explosion. The power transmitted from the blade hit the withered leaves in front of him. The fluttering withered leaves suddenly became heavy. In the next moment, they hissed and shot towards Ding Ning like arrows. He Xiaoxi took a deep breath. His movements suddenly became gentle. His long sword went from slapping to stabbing as he hid the tip of the sword among the flying, withered leaves. Seeing the withered leaves form a wall that was slapped into flying arrows, and then he Xiaoxi's long sword hidden among them. Many students on the viewing platform had complicated emotions. They thought that they might not be able to withstand He Xiaoxi's attack. Ding Ning continued to retreat. The remnant sword in his hand was at his eyebrows, protecting his eyes. He did not care about the countless falling leaves flying towards him. He allowed the leaves to hit his body and even cut his face, leaving bloody marks on his face. But when the tip of the sword was about to reach his left shoulder, he slashed down with his sword. There was an explosion. The gentle yellow longsword was blocked by his sword, and countless sparks flew out from the place where the two swords met. Many people on the viewing platform had bright eyes. They had not expected Ding Ning to be able to block this sword so accurately amidst so many obscuring flying leaves. He Xiaoxi's breathing paused slightly. Feeling the impact from his own sword, he frowned slightly. Without any hesitation, his body seemed to be about to fall forward as he exerted his strength once again, pressing all of his body weight forward. At this time, his yellow longsword and Ding Ning's remnant sword were only half an inch apart, so he did not stop and could not dodge. The two swords met again and gave off another explosion. Ding Ning gave a muffled grunt. He was obviously unable to withstand this kind of power. His entire right arm swayed violently, and his entire body was pushed back as if he had been hit by a galloping horse. In an instant, he had retreated 5 or 6 steps. He Xiaoxi took a step. With just one step, he charged out of the distance Ding Ning had retreated 5 or 6 steps. His hand was still unusually steady as he swung the yellow longsword forward again. When he slashed, the blade cut through the air, causing the sword to move quickly in the air. But when it approached Ding Ning's body, the sword turned sideways, and the blade once again curved in the air as he exerted force. With a snap, He Xiaoxi swung his sword horizontally like he was swinging a hammer towards Ding Ning's body. Ding Ning's inky green remnant sword was covered in fine white flowers. He frowned and kept on sending out physical energy to block in front of him. The ear-piercing sound of metal rang out again. His sword still accurately blocked He Xiaoxi's sword, but the great power caused his remnant sword to bounce back and hit his chest. Ding Ning, who had been flying backwards, seemed to have been hit by a large rock. His feet left the ground, and he flew backwards, in a miserable posture in everyone's eyes. The moment his feet landed on the ground again, a thread of blood seeped out of his lips and dripped down his pale skin. There is no such thing as a free win in this world. Seeing this scene, Xie Changsheng could not help but shout angrily from the viewing platform. He Xiaoxi was not an ordinary student. He clearly possessed superior techniques and rich combat experience. No matter how good Ding Ning's understanding of the Wildfire Sword manual was, it would not be of any use against his overwhelming power. He Zhaoxi could easily attack while Ding Ning's body was still recovering from the shock. Ding Ning would not have time to react and use an exquisite sword move. Xie Changsheng could imagine that Ding Ning's wrist would be in pain like it was being broken with each block of He Zhaoxi's sword. His entire arm would be numb and sore and would not be able to recover quickly. There is no such thing as a free win in this world. As Xie Changsheng spoke, in a Chongling alley, a middle-aged man was sitting on a bench in a street noodle shop. He was drinking noodle soup as he spoke disdainfully to a young person next to him. This middle-aged man, with a straight face and slightly red skin, had a thick yellow bamboo pole used by porters next to him. His clothing was that of an ordinary porter, and even his straw sandals were covered in dirt and worn out. But his true identity was Qin Xian, a wanted criminal of the Divinity Bureau. In the Divinity Bureau, his status was slightly lower than Mo Qinggong and the other evil dogs, but his experience was similar to Mo Qinggong and the others. So, in the Divinity Bureau, he could make most people look at him, and not the majority. The young person next to him, Meng Tianfang, was a fresh meat who had just been transferred to the Divinity Bureau. He came from a decent sect in Chongling, but after entering the Divinity Bureau, he had to obediently call him master and listen to his orders and teachings. Young people who could enter the Divinity Bureau, other than those who had special backers, were truly hardworking, careful, and observant young geniuses. Hearing Qin Xian's words, Meng Tianfang understood. The alley in front of them was called Lion Alley. In Chongling, this was an unusually busy and prosperous place. One end of the alley was the Zhejiang Commandery Meeting Hall, and the other end was the Shandong Commandery Meeting Hall. Between them were shops that sold antiques and paintings. The Qin dynasty had 43 commanderies and was unprecedentedly vast. Chongling was unprecedentedly large and magnificent. When people from the outer commanderies came to Chongling to do business, they often did not know the way. They were not familiar with the place and people, and were often bullied by the locals. So, with the lead of some businesses, they set up many meeting halls. These meeting halls were not just places to stay, but also places where people from the outer commanderies could find people to do business in Chongling and find opportunities to make friends. So usually there was an endless stream of carriages, and it was very busy. Ever since the Yuanwu emperor ascended the throne, the Qin dynasty had not been at war for more than a decade. Everyone had enough to eat and wear. Some of the noble families had to pay attention to their daily food and utensils. The prices of paintings, antiques, furnishings, and toys all rose. The reason Qin Xian said this was because a merchant from another commandery had spent 100 taels of silver to buy a jade Rui from the Yu dynasty right under his nose. If it really was a jade Rui left behind by the Yu dynasty, it would be worth at least 1,000 taels of silver. The merchants in Chongling had done business for so many years and would not sell it cheaply. But looking at the joyful appearance of the merchant from the outer commandery, he clearly was not buying a fake to sell. He clearly thought that he had good eyes and had picked up a great bargain at a low price. But even though Qin Xian did not know much about antiques, he was certain that such a thing could not happen. He had been blinded by greed. Qin Xian drank all of the broth and looked disdainfully at the merchant from the outer commandery who was still celebrating. Suddenly, his expression changed. The young Divinity Bureau official next to him detected something wrong. He grew nervous and asked softly, "Master, what is it?" The Chongling guards, Qin Xian, looked strangely at the other end of the street. He seemed to be answering the other's question, but also seemed to be talking to himself. Why would the Chongling guards come here? The young Divinity Bureau official, Meng Tianfang, stilled. He followed Qin Xian's gaze, and saw dozens of Chongling guards in chainmail passing through another street and heading towards a caravan. That caravan had just left the Zhejiang Commandery meeting hall. Meng Tianfang's expression immediately grew strange. Those Chongling guards gave them the feeling that they were going to investigate the caravan, but Chongling's investigations relied on the Astrology Bureau and the Divinity Bureau. If there was a need to seal or set up checkpoints, they relied on the Tiger Wolf army stationed in Chongling. While the Chongling guards belonged to the warden's office like the Tiger Wolf army, their usual duties were limited to guarding and patrolling certain fixed places. For example, the offices of some bureaus, the security around some marquee establishments, the residences of officials, the outer perimeter of the imperial palace, the tombs of past emperors, and so on. Of course, they could check on people they found suspicious at any time. They would act against criminals. But on the chessboard of Chongling, the Chongling guards were relatively dead pieces. Just like how dogs could go and catch mice at home, but cats would be responsible for catching mice. It would appear strange if the watchdog ran to other places to catch mice. Even more importantly, Meng Tianfang and Qin Xian were watching here because they knew that there was likely a cultivator who could be described as a great rebel hiding in the Zhejiang Commandery meeting hall. Chapter 72. For the present Qin dynasty, there were not many cultivators who could be described as great rebels. Not only did these people have astonishing cultivations and could cause great damage to a stable dynasty, but they also came from illustrious backgrounds. Most of them were flag bearers of dynasties that had already fallen. Dozens of days ago, the Divinity Bureau had found this cultivator who might be a great rebel through some clues. However, they had only been observing in secret because they wanted to obtain more clues from this cultivator and find the leader behind this person, the person that even the emperor was wary of. The inexplicable appearance of these Chongling guards was not a good thing for these two Divinity Bureau officials before the matter had made any decisive progress. Qin Xian and Meng Tianfang exchanged a look. Qin Xian gritted his teeth and immediately made a decision. He said to Meng Tianfang, "Hurry and report to official Qi to prevent any changes." Meng Tianfang's eyes flashed. He did not say anything, but pretended to be afraid of the Chongling guards. He quickly turned into a side alley and left. At this time, the group of Chongling guards in chainmail charged forward like tigers into a pack of wolves and stopped the caravan that had just left the Zhejiang Commandery meeting hall. The leader, a general wearing a black metal mask, shouted viciously, "Stop the carriage! Get down! Prepare the household registration documents." A thin middle-aged man dressed in blue robes bowed and said politely, "What matter does this general have? Is there a misunderstanding? We are Zhejiang Commandery's Tian Shengcheng business." However, before he could finish speaking, with a boom, his body was already kicked out by that general, smashing fiercely into the carriage behind him. For a moment, the lean middle-aged man in green, who looked like an advisor, turned ghastly pale. He couldn't breathe and almost fainted. "Did you not hear what I said? Household registration documents and travel permits." The general who had kicked back the blue-robed advisor held his sword hilt. The metal mask on his face reflected the sunlight as he said coldly, "We suspect that someone in your caravan is related to tomb robbers. Everyone, get off the carriage and show your household registration documents. If you resist, kill them on the spot." The people in the caravan who had been angry and wanted to curse immediately paled. Even the people who had been driven out of the Zhejiang Commandery meeting hall froze where they stood. Stealing from the royal tombs was a serious crime that could result in 9 familial exterminations. If there really was such a person among them, then anyone who dared to speak up for the caravan would suffer and be imprisoned. At this time, Qin Xian, who was still sitting on the long bench facing the street, felt cold again. The general with the Dyson iron mask was walking towards a person in the caravan. This was a man dressed as a carriage driver. He looked to be in his 30s, and his hair was slightly yellow. Although his face was very different from the person the Divinity Bureau had been staring at, his body shape was very similar. Most importantly, with Qin Xian's many years of experience, he could tell that there was something wrong with this coachman's behavior. While he was being interrogated by a Chongling guard and answering questions, his gaze was inexplicably flashing. He had a thoughtful expression and did not have the terror of the others. This gave Qin Xian the feeling that this person was thinking about how to deal with the problem of his identity being exposed. The general with the Dyson black iron mask obviously noticed this person's difference, which was why he walked towards him. What made Qin Xian breathless was that the corner of the man's mouth was slightly raised, as if a strange sneer had appeared. But Qin Xian did not have time to stop anything. Even if he showed his identity and charged over, he would alert the enemy. So he gripped the yellow bamboo pole in his hand tightly and hoped that the reinforcements from the Divinity Bureau would come quickly. "I see that you have a great problem. What is your name?" The general with the cold iron mask had walked in front of the man who looked like a carriage driver and asked coldly. The person who looked like a carriage driver reached out his left hand to rub his face, pausing on his stubbled chin for a breath of time. He seemed to have finally thought it through and made his decision. He smiled inexplicably and looked at this general with a provocative gaze. "You really want to know?" A dangerous aura suddenly filled the entire long alley. Even the other Chongling guards who were investigating felt something was wrong. They turned to look in the direction of the carriage driver. The general in the shadows under the eaves, whose face could not be seen clearly, also suddenly raised his head, his eyes shining like stars. The general with the cold iron mask paused slightly and sneered. "It seems that it is you. I want to see what kind of name can scare me in Chongling." The person who looked like a carriage driver smiled, showing his white teeth. "You will know when you see my sword." The moment he said this, the air around him suddenly shook. Smoke and dust rushed out from the cracks in the ground under his feet. The clear streets seemed to have suddenly become foggy. At the same time, the numerous carriages around him seemed to become weightless pieces of paper and flew outwards. The general with the cold iron mask pulled out his sword in shock. The scene in this moment was as still as a painting. His sword was halfway out of its sheath. The carriages had just flown silently. The wheels had just left the ground, and the person who looked like a carriage driver had finished waving his hand forward. There seemed to be a stream of water in the air that swept across the general's body from top to bottom. A thread of light suddenly appeared in the middle of the cold mask on the general's face, and then split open. There was a shocked face under the mask, and then a red line appeared in the middle of this face. Cloud water. When the person who looked like a carriage driver attacked, the general had already pulled out his sword and shouted in shock. Yet, when countless beads of blood flew out of the red line, he only managed to shout 2 words. Boom. In the next moment, the carriages that seemed to have stopped in the air crashed into the shops on the sides. At the same time, the general's body split in half from the middle. Blood sprayed into the cold air. At this time, the surrounding Chongling guards finally saw that this person who looked like a carriage driver was holding a sword that seemed to be made from spring water. The great rebel of the Wei Cloud Water Palace. An incredulous howl rang out. This shout was made with vital energy. The sound seemed to penetrate metal and split stone, and spread far away in an instant. There was a ripping sound. The one who let out this howl was the general who had originally been hiding in the shadows. A small peach-red sword flew in front of him. As it flew rapidly, layers upon layers of the sword bloomed, as if it wanted to fill the space around this man who looked like a coachman. But facing such a sword, the man who looked like a carriage driver put away his sword with one hand, put his hands behind his back, and smiled proudly. A window in the Zhejiang Commandery meeting hall next to him silently disappeared, crushed to powder by a vast primal energies of the universe. A glowing drop of water floated down. Just one drop, but it shattered all the peach blossoms. The peach-red sword broke. The commander of the Chongling Guards collapsed to the ground. His body seemed to shrink several inches, and a mouthful of blood surged out of his mouth. Qin Xian looked up in disbelief at the Zhejiang Commandery meeting hall. We like to learn the sword and spend 10 years in the cold pool. With a soft sound, a white figure floated down from the Zhejiang Commandery meeting hall. All the colors in the sky seemed to be covered by this person. Everyone in the streets looked up. Slaying the serpent in one day, blue water crimson for 3 months, this person was still singing slowly. With a boom, more than a dozen armored Chongling guards were sent flying in all directions and fell into the eaves on the sides. You're tuning into the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.